I can attest to this from personal experience more than anything. The biggest misconception, I believe, is that you can just get a few certifications and then waltz into a job because of the job market shortage and the lack of trained professionals for this kind of stuff. That's absolutely not the case. I was being beaten down left, right, and center by people saying not enough experience. Come back when you've got 2 or 3 years in the industry, and it's that catch-22 at the end of the day where you need the job to get experience, but nobody's going to give you the job to get experience. So the biggest misconception for me is that it's do your certs and then waltz into a job and it's that easy. That's absolutely not the case, and not just from my perspective, but from people I speak to on a daily basis.
Welcome to CyberSecurity Heroes, an IRONSCALES podcast about you, the heroes of cybersecurity. You're about to hear and learn practical and experiential knowledge in our conversations with security leaders and practitioners and other influential InfoSec stars, so we can become more cyber resilient and safer together. CyberSecurity Heroes is brought to you by IRONSCALES, the most powerfully simple email security platform. And I'm your host, Brendan Rudd. And now, let's get into the show. Hey Thomas, welcome to the show.
Hi Brendan, thanks for having me. Real pleasure to be here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today on CyberSecurity Heroes. So, as you know, we're working through a series where we're bringing on all sides of the cyber spectrum in order to provide solutions to the cyber talent gap and skills shortage, as they say. So, would love to get your insights and what you're seeing on the ground, especially being in HR. So, before we begin, would you mind telling us a little bit about you, your background, and what you're working on these days?
Sure, absolutely. So graduated all the way back in the misty times of 2016. First job out of university was 2 years spent at an IT hardware sales company. There is where I kind of started to get to grips with IT and the hardware, and that's where I started discovering my passion for this kind of stuff. Then after that, I moved into conference management, and then after that, we had the world go a bit mad with COVID, and I used that time to further studies myself. So picked up a few Microsoft certifications, a few CompTIA ones, S Plus and N Plus, just to name a few, and the CEH, and now I've taken on my newest role as a cybersecurity recruitment consultant at the Premier Group in our Reading office.
So tell us a bit about your journey before you arrived at the Premier Group.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of went to university. I did international relations, which is, I guess, international politics. So studying foreign policy and that kind of stuff. And I kind of stumbled into cybersecurity, if I'm really honest, because one of the lectures I had in my second year was about the Stuxnet virus, which is where American and Israeli computer scientists effectively and secret services designed this virus to be implanted onto the Iranian centrifuges. And looking at it from an international relations perspective, it was, here's how nation states can kind of interfere with each other without it going into overt hostility, because the rules of war are very clearly set out. If you step into somebody's territory, that's a declaration. But what if you start messing with their IT systems from the comfort of your own nation state borders? So that was their perspective on it. I kind of looked at that and went, my jaw basically hit the floor, and I went, this can't be real. This can't be a real job. It turns out, yes, it is absolutely a very, very real job and a growing industry. And that's kind of where I stumbled into it, and then started reading around all these very famous attacks, all the different common tools. And after I graduated, I kind of pivoted away from what I studied and just picked it up as more of a hobbyist, really, cybersecurity, and just learning bits and bobs where I can, following key industry individuals on LinkedIn and Twitter, and watching YouTube videos and that kind of stuff, really.
What was your experience with the IT job market before you landed up in recruiting?
So my exposure to IT was working in an IT hardware company. So it was a distributor company. So you'd have like your vendors like Lenovo, HP, Dell, and we would basically act as the logistical middleman, making sure that they got to the clients properly and sorting all the shipping and freight and all that kind of thing. And that's kind of where I got exposed to kind of IT. So I guess it was very much like a ground up approach, because in order to talk to people and sell one laptop over another, you very much need to understand the differences. And you very quickly, I guess, by just being surrounded by people who had been in the industry, you learned the difference between DDR3 and DDR4. You learned the different vendors. You learned what's the difference between an SSD and an HDD. And yeah, this is very basic stuff, but you always need to get your foundation set. It's much like if you're going to build a house, you start with the foundations. You can't put the roof on straight away, kind of thing.
And you mentioned also trying to get into a more of an infosec role. Can you talk through your experience in the job market and some of the challenges you're faced with?
Absolutely. And these challenges will very much be a recurring theme throughout our entire conversation. After I finished my last exam, I was like, right, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to get my first job in InfoSec, and I'm going to make loads of money as a very fancy InfoSec person. That wasn't the case. A lot of the themes that, we'll be talking about later are ones that I've actually personally experienced. So being rejected because of lack of experience, being rejected because you've not got certain certifications, not hearing any feedback at all from, you've applied to these companies and they've not even given you the courtesy of sorry, you were unsuccessful. And I'm sure a lot of us have been in that situation. A lot of people who will end up listening to this, where they've been searching for a job, maybe they've been made redundant, or they're unemployed, or through any number of personal circumstances find themselves out of work. And it can be very frustrating just applying to any and all jobs and not really getting any response. It's like banging your head against a brick wall, really. And that's when I was approached actually to join the Premier Recruitment Company, and they said, we'll let you come in and we'll let you work cybersecurity. So I'm in a very fortunate position actually, where I've been brought into a company which has allowed me to pursue my passion, even though that's not really their core market. They've allowed me to come in and basically set up shop within the Premier Group to specialize in cybersecurity. So very, very fortunate and eternally thankful for their opportunity they gave me, really.
Based on what you're seeing now and also from your job hunting experience, what's a big misconception around cyber education that you passionately disagree with?
So I can attest to this from personal experience more than anything. The biggest misconception, I believe, is that you can just get a few certifications and then waltz into a job because of the job market shortage and the lack of trained professionals for this kind of stuff. That's absolutely not the case. I was being beaten down left, right, and center by people saying not enough experience. Come back when you've got 2 or 3 years in the industry, and it's that catch-22 at the end of the day, where you need the job to get experience, but nobody's going to give you the job to get experience. So the biggest misconception for me is that it's do your certs and then waltz into a job and it's that easy. That's absolutely not the case. And not just from my perspective, but from people I speak to on a daily basis now, from the recruitment perspective, who are looking to break into cybersecurity and who might have 2-3 years of experience as, IT help desk or support or any other kind of IT role, and are looking to make that, that jump and that transition.
As you got into this recruiting role, what are some of the challenges your customers are facing other than the ones you already just mentioned?
Sure. So it's going to sound probably a little bit like a stuck record, but education and training, and that goes both ways. It's a bit of a two-way street. Candidates need to be educated to the sense that you can't just, do a boot camp or get a few certifications and then waltz into a job. But also clients need to be educated as well. For instance, you can't just put all number of certifications on a job specification and turn it into a bit of an alphabet soup. For instance, I see like the CISSP, which is a very high level certification. In fact, as of January 2021, less than 150,000 people worldwide have that certification. And you're putting that on what is effectively like an entry level cybersecurity job. So it's a bit of a give and take, really, where candidates need to understand they need to, lay the groundwork and companies and my clients need to understand that you can't just find somebody with a CISSP and an OCSP all the time, and you should be more open to bringing somebody into a pre-existing team and nurturing them up.
You also spoke about elitism and growing pains. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are industry professionals who have been in the industry for 20, 25, 30 years. And just as a disclaimer, not everybody who's been in the industry is going to be like this. There are some very, fantastic people in the industry who will be great mentors and are really, looking to change the industry. But just because you struggled and suffered to get where you are and it took you 20 years doesn't mean you should enforce that on the next generation. We should be making things easier for people that follow in our footsteps. And again, just a disclaimer, not all veteran industry members have this mentality, but there are unfortunately some who do. And they're often in positions to make decisions regarding who to bring in. And you're not professional enough to be a SOC manager, or you don't have enough experience, or you haven't got a degree kind of thing. They need to be more open-minded and accepting from people from all different backgrounds and all different walks of life, really. In regards to the growing pains I mentioned on our previous call, it's a very new industry. And much like all new industries, there are going to be we're going to make mistakes. We're humans, we're not perfect, and it's up to us to recognize when we're making those mistakes and rectifying them as soon as possible. Think to all new industries when they came out, and we look back now. When cars were first invented, they didn't have seatbelts. For us nowadays, that's oh my God, why? Of course, why would you never have a seatbelt? And we just need to make sure that we're being mature and broad enough in our outlook to prevent such, I guess, bad habits is probably the best way to put it, forming into cybersecurity, given it's only probably been around for the last 15, 20 years, if that.
100%. And I really liked what you said about we should make it easier for newcomers to get into the industry. So the market today, can you talk a little bit about where the market is? What insights can you share being on the front lines?
So I can't comment to what it's like overseas in the States or any other country. I can only speak about my experience here in the UK, the United Kingdom. It is incredibly fast-paced. You will see a candidate maybe upload their CV onto the job boards. We might reach out to them because we're resourcing a role for somebody. And if the client doesn't move quickly enough on them, if they're saying, oh, give us a week to make a decision, I'm sorry, but put yourself in their shoes. You're not only going to apply to one company, wait to hear back, even if you do get rejection, then move on. No, you're going to be applying, much like I did, to 10, 15, 20 companies. And companies need to understand that it's now a candidate-owned and driven market, and they're not competing to attract the best candidates in the field. They're competing against their other companies in the field, and if they don't move fast enough, they're going to miss out on the best talent. So if you've got like a 4-stage interview process, your dropout rate is going to be so high if you can't keep that tight process within like a 2-week time frame. If it takes you more than 3 or 4 interviews to understand if somebody's going to be a right fit and if they've got the competencies, then that process is too long, and that needs to be shortened because you are going to miss out on so many good candidates. The average, I guess, life cycle is probably the best way to put it for a candidate in the UK market right now is about 2.5 weeks, which when you take out weekends is 10, 11, 12 days, which is not a lot of time from sending a CV, getting CV feedback, booking in a 1st-stage interview, if they do well, booking in a 2nd stage, and then maybe a 3rd stage. It's incredibly fast-paced, and no 2 days are alike in that regard.
Would you say there is an uneven balance between the types of placements that are happening?
I can only speak to my experience. The type of roles that I end up working, and a lot of my colleagues tend to be more mid to senior. Our clients will often come to us which are struggling to fill these mid to senior roles. I'm probably one of the exceptions because I do occasionally get an entry level role just because it's cybersecurity, and they send me a job specification. And as I mentioned earlier, why have you got all these certifications for managers when this is an entry level role? Because companies, especially large companies, will be able to have an internal department if they're big enough, and be able to attract the junior and the graduate level candidates fairly easily. And so for us, it's more mid to high senior executives that we end up resourcing for. Not to say we won't help if they're struggling to fill like a graduate position or a junior help desk position, but in my experience and what I've seen in and around the team, it's more mid to senior. It's probably like 2/3, a third split.
So it sounds like the market is really hot for experience and the junior roles are just piling up.
Absolutely, and it's a very unfortunate situation because we've got loads of really talented graduates who have maybe poured their heart and soul into their studies for the last 3, maybe 4 years, who are coming out and then just being hit with the reality of, for graduates, it's an incredibly competitive marketplace because for a numerous number of factors that would be too detailed for us to potentially go into in such a short period of time. But that's why one of the reasons I actually got into recruitment. I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but if I can help people not make some of the mistakes I did and to help them get their foot in the door, then for me, I'm going to consider that a success, really.
Can you speak to any success cases where junior roles were filled, and what was the ingredients for those successful cases? Was it luck, or was there something there that you can share?
Yeah, absolutely. So the harder you work, the luckier you tend to get. One role I recently filled actually was for a very junior individual. I'm going to take out company names and personal names for obvious reasons. So this very junior candidate, he had all the qualifications, and I spoke to him, and his drive and passion was clearly there. And this was actually one of the first interviews he went to post graduation, so he was a bit nervous, as I'm sure you would be if you put yourself in his shoes, where you've just come out of university. It's that very important first job out of uni that you need. And he called me after the interview and said, Thomas, I think I flubbed it, basically. He stumbled over his words, was getting very nervous. And when I spoke to my client afterward, they said very much the same thing. I managed to talk them round into letting him have another go. And when I went back to the candidate, he was absolutely ecstatic that he'd been effectively given a second shot, because technically he known he's there. And I'd basically put my reputation on the line for this guy by saying, if he'd flubbed it again, why would that client ever want to work with me again? So he absolutely went in. He gave it the beans, far more confident, was far more concise and passionate in his delivery. And after an initial conversation, the client decided to offer him, which he accepted on the spot. So you might not meet 100% of job requirements, and don't be afraid to give it 100% in every interview, because you don't know where it could go. And just because you failed at A doesn't mean you're going to fail at B effectively. So I guess the secret sauce is there is no secret sauce. It's only how hard are you willing to work to get the job effectively, and how much work you're going to put in. Because many people before have said this, and I'm not going to be the first person to ever say this. You get out what you put in, and the fact that he clearly did his research. He researched the company. He called up a couple of the company's clients to ask them, hi, I'm interviewing with company X. I know they supply you. Can you tell me what they're like as a supplier? So he's then able to go into the interview with company X and say, I spoke to your supplier, one of your customers, company Y, and they gave you glowing reviews, and that's one of the reasons why I want to work for a company such as yourself. They were absolutely blown away by that kind of thing, which is just incredible to think about it.
So kind of going the extra mile and really studying your potential future employer and trying to align yourself with their maybe their core values, for example.
Yeah, definitely. Always go in with 3 to 4 good quality questions that showcase you've researched the company that's interviewing you, because just as much as they're making sure you're right for them, you've got to make sure that they're right for you. It's a two-way street. It's not I guess as an unequal a procedure as a lot of people make it out to be. It's like, sure, they might offer you the job, but if you're going to work there and hate it, then why would you even accept that? You need to make sure it's going to be right for you just as much as you're right for the company, effectively.
I would love to hear from you those kind of fly on the wall conversations with both job seekers and the companies. Could you kind of like walk us through those phone calls from both sides and anything that you think that needs addressing for good or for bad?
Sure. So we'll start with candidates, for instance. So if you see a candidate's CV on the job board, they're clearly looking, because that just makes sense, right? So, but what's most important is to understand the reason for them to look. So understand the motivation. Is it purely financial? Is it they are coming into work and just doing one monotonous task day in, day out until they can go home? Is it they want to work with different technology? What's their reason for looking? Is a very important thing to understand, because if it's purely financial, what we're seeing a lot at the moment, we are seeing a lot of counter offers, which is basically, you hand your notice in and then the company will panic because they've managed to hold on to talent throughout the pandemic. But now that the world's opening up again, people are looking elsewhere to see what their options are like. You probably heard the term, the Great Resignation, being bandied around, where we're looking at a lot of people who are just thinking of quitting because they've come to a realization during lockdown and during the pandemic that actually I'm not enjoying what I'm doing. I want to find something else. I know I've got the skills. So motivation's a real important one. Where their passion lies, salary expectations. Are they willing to travel? Would they prefer remote work? Can they work remote? Understand the wider circumstances. So for instance, if you're talking to Mr. Smith, for instance, and Mr. Smith wants to move job and said, oh yeah, it's absolutely fine, I'll relocate for the role. That's very good, Mr. Smith. Have you spoken to Mrs. Smith as well? Does she work in the local area? Can she relocate? What about, do you have children? Are your children in school? Are you willing to move the kid into a new school once you've relocated? A lot of these questions don't really get asked initially and can lead to bumps in the road, I guess, further down the process. Because imagine you're Mr. Smith and I've made you aware of an opportunity. You really love it. You've gone through first, second stage interview. They've offered you. You've gone home. You've sat down over dinner with the wife and said, honey, I've accepted a new offer. We're going to have to move halfway over the country. And then she says, well, what about Jack at school? Or what about my job, because I work in a local shop, for instance? I can't just move halfway around the country without needing a new job. And so understanding all those issues at the beginning of the process is really going to help keep it as smooth as possible. From a company perspective, I've alluded to this earlier, but companies need to have realistic expectations of actually what they want. I'm sure you've read job descriptions, and a lot of it you just go, why would you need that and that and that and that and that? That's all mutually exclusive. My job is to educate, given my market specialization. And as I mentioned earlier, you see job requirements with the CISSP on them. You see absolutely absurd requirements, like for a junior role, you need 3 to 5 years of experience and you need a management certificate. That's completely unrealistic for your pay grade. No wonder this job's not been filled in 6 months. The ideal candidate does not exist. So in summary, for candidates, it's about understanding motivation and what's driving them to seek a new opportunity. And for companies, it's often about educating to help them understand what the marketplace is like at the moment, how quickly people move. As I said earlier, marketplace, especially in the UK, is very quick, with the average candidate lifespan being only about 2.5 weeks at most. So if a company is slow in their process, they're going to lose out on candidates. And if a company's got an unrealistic job description, then they're also going to lose out, because every day that role isn't filled is the company losing money, effectively.
CyberSecurity Heroes is brought to you by IRONSCALES, an AI-powered, self-learning email security platform that helps security professionals proactively prevent, detect, and remediate phishing attacks in a matter of seconds, not hours or days. And we have an exclusive offer for our podcast listeners. Discover dormant phishing threats in your organization's mailboxes. Get a free 90-day scan back with a detailed report. Integrate in seconds with 2 clicks via API to Microsoft Office 365 and see what your current email security is missing. Go to ironscales.com/free scan to learn more.
And would you say that job hopping is quite a thing as well in the UK?
So there is that. It's one of the reasons why I like to qualify why the candidate is looking. And if I look at a candidate's CV and I see the last 3 to 4 years is maybe a year or less than a year, I know one of my clients' first questions is going to be, well, this guy isn't going to stay very long, is he? So ideally, you'd look for, and this isn't an absolute figure, this can depend on personal circumstances, any number of things, which if I have that conversation, I can understand and go, yeah, well, I was like, oh, Tom, this candidate looks great, but his last 4 roles have been less than a year. It's like, well, when he was at company A, it was because of family circumstance. When it was at company B, it was a redundancy. When it was at company C, if you can understand those reasons, then it's fine. But if the only reason they offer was, oh, I wanted more money, that is going to lead to you don't have an answer for when the company asks you why is his last 4 jobs been less than a year. So ideally, you're probably looking at a minimum 1.5 to 2 years per role for it to really count, because first 6 months in the role, you're getting settled, you're being onboarded, you're adjusting to culture. And so if you're only actually working a role 2 years, then the first 6 months is more like settling in, getting accustomed to routine. So you were actually only there like 1.5 years, which is not a very long time. So in terms of job hopping, I try to avoid it in my candidates, because I know my clients. I want my clients to come back to me long term. I want a long-term relationship with them. So for me, every candidate I put across represents me and my company, and that's why I need to make sure I understand their motivation. Contractors is an entirely different story. They've been brought in to do a project and then they move on, which is fine if they're a contractor. But if it's permanent work, ideally you're looking for 1.5 to 2 years, if not more. I tend to try and avoid job hoppers if I can, just for the reasons I previously mentioned.
And from your experience, what is the main reason for folks job hopping? Is it primarily financial? Or
It can be financial, it can be culture, it can be, the role turned out not to be what was actually promised. So there's a whole number of reasons as to why somebody might move through a series of jobs quite quickly. And that's why qualifying a candidate's motivation and why they're looking, and understanding their story and where they're kind of coming from is very important. Because if I can understand that, and as I mentioned, if I can understand their story and go, well, company A was redundancy, company B was they closed the office and wanted me to relocate, company C said I would be allowed to work remote, but as soon as the pandemic ended, they wanted everybody back in the office. Those are just a few examples of I guess, stories that I've heard in the last few weeks. And if you understand the circumstances, it's fine as long as you can offer an explanation. But I guess one of the primary, well, again, the primary reasons could be anything, which is why qualifying is so important, really. So it could be any number of things under the sun, really.
From your perspective, are companies in the UK paying competitively? What is the situation with regards to salaries and compensation?
Sure. So salaries and compensation, we can see given how candidate driven the marketplace is at the moment, companies are wanting to retain talent. So it might not be quite in the same vein as salaries, but as I mentioned before, the huge increase in counter offers just shows you how desperate companies are to retain quality talent. For salaries, a lot of the roles I've been working on, again, I can only speak to my personal experiences. A lot of the roles have been paying market rate or slightly above market rate because companies are seeing the way the wind is blowing. A lot of very good candidates are probably going to be coming onto the market in the next few months because, as I mentioned, great resignation is quite possibly going to be a thing. A lot of people know their worth, and if they know their worth, then they aren't going to apply to a role which they know isn't paying them what the average wage is or what they know they're worth. So, for instance, sometimes clients will come to us, and it's part of our consultative role as recruitment consultants to effectively go to market and understand, here's the job spec, and speak to industry experts and go, what would you be willing to do that job for? So I was resourcing a role 2 months ago, for instance, where my client came to me and said, we're not quite sure what the salary should be on this position. Can you educate us to the state of the marketplace? And so I went away and I spoke to people in the industry who could do the job and say, what would you be looking for effectively given the job spec? And that way I was able to go back to my client and say, this is the salary band you probably want to be taking to market for this particular role. So from what I've seen from my personal circumstances, companies in the UK are offering competitive and or equal to above market rate for a lot of the salaries that I end up working.
Since the pandemic, how has it impacted recruiting?
One of the really big changes we've seen is the spike in requiring remote work, which means that you no longer have to live within 20, 30 miles of the company's offices to be applying for it. So you could hire somebody in Scotland, like Glasgow or Edinburgh, and then work for a company in London nowadays. And they don't even need to step foot into the office. Maybe they come down once a month. So in the UK, for instance, one of the big shifts was the huge demand in remote work. And I think that's going to become the established norm because people have been doing that for the last 15, 16, 17 months. And they've just become accustomed to it, and then they've come to the realization, it's like, why was I actually getting stuck in traffic 45 minutes, Monday to Friday, and then having to drive all the way back again? That to me just doesn't make any sense. So I think the big thing that's coming out of the pandemic is from a British work culture perspective, is the huge demand as work from home probably going to be considered the norm in the next 5 to 10 years, I feel.
In terms of looking outside of IT, do you get requests like, hey, I really need to fill this role. I'm willing to look outside of IT or cybersecurity to fill this role? Because we hear a lot about like how we need to be more creative in filling these roles. So I'm just curious if it's started trickling down to you in your company, or at least in the industry in the UK.
I tend to look at people's passion, because you can hire passion and teach skills. You can't really teach passion. I suppose you could, but you look for passion and drive. So I've been speaking to former British Army personnel who are now, I guess, transitioning out of military life and are now looking for a cyber role. Police officers who are, walk the streets, typical bobbies on the beat, now looking to move into cybersecurity, former truck drivers, all manner of backgrounds. I've been speaking to somebody who used to be a tree surgeon, now looking to get into cybersecurity. So if you've got the passion and the drive, that's going to come across an interview, and I can turn around to my client and say, yes, he's spent the last 10 years of his life being a tree surgeon. However, in 6 months of dedicating himself to cybersecurity, he has done this, 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 and this, and this. He's in the top 10% of the UK people for Hack the Box. He's passed these learning pathways on Try Hack Me. He's engaging with the community online. He's doing X and Y and Z. Background doesn't matter as long as the passion is there, in my opinion.
So you talked about finding passion. What else are you looking for when you're going through your resume process in finding a good fit? What does a good resume look like? Do you need a cover letter, for examples? Do recruiters read cover letters?
I'll start with the easy one. Do recruiters read cover letters? I do read cover letters, and it's nice. It's a nice to have. If you can tailor a cover letter to each individual role, that's even better, because that way you're showing commitment from your end that I went out of my time in my busy schedule to write a specific cover letter for this particular role and why I would be a good fit. A good resume CV is not too long. You need to be snappy and to the point. You need to be able to attract somebody's attention within the first 5 lines. So put your strongest experience right at the top. In your summary needs to be a really strong buy-in. You've probably got maybe 5-6 sentences to engage people, because if you're a hiring manager and you have 15, 20, 25, 30 CVs on your desk, are you really going to read all of them in page to page, or are you going to skim, see what you like and take? That's I don't make the rules. I'm sorry. That's how it is. I'm afraid. I wish it was different, but they have a day job in addition to hiring for their team. So they need to look for a few key things, which is why your summary needs to be really strong. In terms of structure, no longer than 2 to 3 pages. Again, might depend more on your experience or how long you've got in the industry. And in terms of structure, if you're a postgraduate, i.e. if you've had a job or two since you've graduated, summary, experience, then education. If you've just graduated, summary, education, because you won't have any or much experience to speak of, so your education plays a stronger part in the selling with your CV. So generally what I like to do is when I see a CV, because at the end of the day a CV is 3 pieces of A4 paper, it's not a person. Call the person, understand what it is they're looking for. This is where the qualification comes in. This is where you're looking to understand motivation. And if I've seen amazingly strong CVs, but I've called the person and they've been a bit, they've been a bit down, and maybe they were having a bad day. But if I put somebody across and they're a bit down, that's going to come across in the interview and be like, well, we need somebody with a bit more positivity, please. I've spoken to people who are not as strong on paper, but when I've spoken to them, they are on it. They know their stuff, and it's about ensuring the CV gets you in the door to the interview. Once you get to the interview, it's all on you as a person. The CV has done its job. So that's why it needs to be short and to the point and as strong as possible in terms of like formatting and ability to grab attention.
I would like to follow on with the interview process. Do you actually provide any assistance in doing mock interviews? Where do your services start and end?
Sure. So I can provide mock interviews. So for instance, given my unique background as coming into recruiting, having a few IT certifications, I can effectively act as that first stage. And one of my I guess conversation pieces I bring up with my clients is, you don't need a 3-stage interview process, because I can be your first stage, because I can ask them the qualifying IT questions to know. So I can run mock interviews. I can also act as a first stage for my clients, and that way, as I mentioned earlier, streamlines the process, keeps it as focused as possible to prevent that 2-week turnover, and then us just having to go back to the job boards and try and find somebody else and go back to square one. So I guess in terms of tips for interviews, inject your personality. You're not a statistic. Again, the CV is a piece of paper. You are not your CV. Make sure that your personality comes across in these interviews. People buy people. And at the end of the day, if you've got that passion and that drive, and you can translate that into a conversation with a hiring manager, HR, they're going to take that and go, wow, Sam was really impressive in the interview. The passion was there, the drive was there, and show that you've done your homework. As I mentioned earlier, Ask good quality questions that highlight you've gone away and spent your time researching the company. It's like, why do you want to work for this company? Well, I recently read the CEO's most recent blog post, and it really resonated with me when he was talking about cybersecurity concept A, B, and C. Wouldn't that amaze you if you were a hiring manager and somebody had said, I've gone away, I've read your blog, and I was really impressed with all the things you were talking about, and then they tell you, they basically reflect back to you what you've said in that blog to show that they've actually gone away, read it, and done their research. Would you not be impressed with that?
From your experience, what would you say to companies from your insider knowledge about what employees are passionate about other than compensation? What can companies tap into to retain the talent once they fill those seats?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of talent retention, do not make counter offers, because if you're relying on a counter offer, it's already too late. And the fact that you're only putting an extra 10 grand or whatever it is on top of somebody's base salary when they're threatening to leave shows you didn't appreciate them when they were working for you. You only appreciated their value when they threatened to leave. So I think in terms of what we need to see these days is culture, an awareness of mental health, which is an increasingly large part of what people look for, and just a nice place to work, really. And whether that's in increased time off for maternity, paternity, it's you don't need a lot to make people happy, but what you do need to do is take people seriously and treat them with respect, and ask them, what do I need to do to make you happy and content in this role? What do I need to do? Oh, I could really appreciate you bringing somebody else into the team because I'm having to do the work of two people. Okay, we'll go to market and try and bring somebody else in. Be responsive. You don't have to be perfect, because no company is perfect. But if you show your staff that you care and you listen, you will retain talent far more than people who maybe don't care as much, for instance. So to take, for instance, you go into a role, year one, you have an annual review, but then there's nothing other than that annual review. You've not really spoken in depth with your manager, and therefore, without being able to speak to people, without an avenue for discussion, you can kind of go, well, I feel isolated, I'm not enjoying myself, I might as well start looking. And at that point, it's too late, because people will have settled in their mind. And that's why, from a company perspective, if you want to retain the best talent, treat them like human beings and treat them with respect. It's really not that difficult.
Are you seeing changes in benefits and company culture? Have things changed for the better, or it's still a long way to go?
A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. Some of the clients I work with are very keen on culture fit, and they're very keen to understand. Some companies I work with are like, if you're feeling stressed, you can just take an extra day off as holiday as mental health leave. Does that, and we've seen this with a lot of other companies, especially some of them in the States, actually offering, you've probably heard about it, unlimited time off, where you can take as much holiday as you need, as long as when you come back, you're working. Some companies, I guess, as I alluded to earlier, with the individuals who, the industry veterans who are, I had to do it the hard way, so you have to do it the hard way as well. Unfortunately, some of them are still in positions of influence and power, where they can make life difficult for new people trying to enter the industry, where I did it the tough way, you have to do it the tough way. It's like, no, you progress is about making things easier for people who follow us. You trailblaze, you set the path for people behind you, for it to be easier for them. Imagine how little we would have progressed as a species if we've never historically helped each other. We'd constantly be resetting, but no, we've built on the shoulders of giants, because they trailblazed and they set forward. So some companies unfortunately aren't there yet, but I'm sure they'll get there.
Thank you note. Must have or nice to have?
It's a nice to have, because who knows, 5-10 years time, you might be coming full circle and be reapplying. And if you'd gone the extra mile to leave a thank you note, or thank you for the opportunity, I'm sorry it didn't particularly work out on this occasion, 10 years time, that they might still remember you, and your career in 10 years' time might have come full circle, and you might be applying for the same or even a more senior role in the same company. And if they can go, oh yeah, you were the guy 10 years ago who left us a really thoughtful thank you note. We still have your data on file. Yeah, we'd love to have you in. No, why would you burn a bridge or fully slam a door closed when it's unnecessary to do so? People remember good experiences, and they will remember you if you do that. So it's a nice to have.
If it's such a cutthroat market, I would assume any bit of leverage you can have, you should go for it. And it doesn't take more than 2 minutes. So
it's very little commitment for a potentially huge payoff. So why would you not? So
before we round up the show here today, is there anything you would like to add? Anything we missed?
Not that I can think of, actually. I think we've covered a lot of, I guess, the recruitment aspect of cybersecurity.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for taking the time to join us today on Cybersecurity Heroes. For anyone wanting to connect with you or to use your services, what's the best way for people to contact you?
Sure. Best way for people to contact me is to reach out on LinkedIn. Just search Tomas Walker Premier Group, spelt TOMAS, or just search for Premier Group Recruitment and then search for Thomas. You'll find me. Email address is twalker@pg-rec.co.uk. Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or email. I'm more than happy to grow my InfoSec network and help anybody and anyone I can, really, and do my part to, I guess, help break down the barriers and the difficulty that we often see with a lot of people trying to enter cybersecurity.
Definitely. So thank you again for the time today, and to the rest of you, we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
That's a wrap for this episode of Cybersecurity Heroes. Practical and experiential knowledge on a day in the life of security heroes. Catch our next episode by subscribing or following through your favorite podcast platform. If you're listening on Apple Podcast, please leave a rating for the show. They really help a lot. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.